Three men walked into K2's death zone on the night of February 5, 2021. None of them came back. One of them was the greatest mountaineer Pakistan had ever produced. His name was Muhammad Ali Sadpara. He was 45 years old. He had a wife waiting in a village with no running water. He had 4 children, and his youngest son, his climbing partner, his protege, the boy he had trained since childhood, was on that mountain with him. That son's name was Sajid. He was 20 years old. Sajid turned back. His father did not. And here's the part that will stay with you long after this video ends. Sajid didn't turn back because he was scared. He didn't turn back because he was weak. He turned back because his oxygen regulator broke at 700-800 meters. A piece of equipment worth less than $200 malfunctioned in the most hostile environment on the planet. Sajid begged his father to descend with him. Ali Sadpara looked at his son, made a decision, and kept climbing. That decision killed him. But here's what most people don't know about that night. If you've heard this story before, you've probably heard the simple version. Father and son climb K2 in winter. Son's equipment breaks. Father continues. Father dies. A tragedy of ambition. That's not what happened. Not even close. What happened on K2 in the winter of 2021 was the collision of national pride, a race between countries, equipment that had no business being on that mountain, pressure from an entire nation watching, and a man who had spent his whole life proving that Pakistanis could climb their own mountains, being crushed by the weight of that proof. Ali Sadpara wasn't alone when he disappeared. 2 other climbers were with him. Juan Pablo Moore, a 33-year-old Chilean mountaineer attempting to complete the South American trilogy of 8,000-meter peaks, and John Snorri Sigurjonsson, a 47-year-old Icelandic climber who had been obsessed with K2 for years. 3 men, 3 countries, 1 mountain. All 3 vanished. Their bodies have never been found. Now think about that. K2 is not a small mountain, but it's been climbed hundreds of times. Dozens of bodies are visible on its slopes. Climbers pass them on the way up. They're frozen in place, preserved by altitude and cold, marking the routes like warnings carved in flesh. But Ali Sadpara, Juan Pablo Moore, and John Snorri? K2 swallowed them completely. No trace. No gear. No final resting place anyone has ever located with certainty. The mountain took them and kept them. If you're watching this and you think you know this story, I promise you, you don't. Not yet, because the story everyone tells leaves out the most important parts. It leaves out what happened 10 days before the summit push, when a team of Nepali climbers did something no one had ever done in history, and how that achievement put a target on Ali Sadpara's back. It leaves out the oxygen system. Not just that it failed, why it failed, who supplied it, and whether anyone tested it before Sajid's life depended on it at nearly 8,000 meters. It leaves out what Sajid saw when he looked back at his father for the last time, what his father said, and why Sajid has told that story differently in different interviews. Not because he's lying, but because the truth is something he's still trying to understand. And it leaves out the biggest question of all, the one that haunted Pakistan for months, the one that Sajid himself has struggled to answer publicly. Did Ali Sadpara have to die? Was the winter summit of K2 worth a human life? Was it worth 3? And if it wasn't, then who sent him up there? Who created the pressure? Who turned a 45-year-old father from a village with no electricity into a national symbol who felt he couldn't come down without the summit? This is the complete story. Every decision, every failure, every moment that led to the disappearance of Pakistan's greatest mountaineer, and the son who has to live with the fact that he survived. If you've never subscribed to this channel, now is the time. Because what you're about to hear isn't the version the Pakistani government told. It isn't the version the expedition companies promoted. It's the version that comes from the mountain itself, from the people who were there, the timelines that don't add up, and the 20-year-old kid who walked down K2 alone in the dark, knowing his father was dying somewhere above him and there was nothing he could do about it. Let me take you back, not to the mountain, not yet. First, you need to understand who Ali Sadpara was, because the man who disappeared on K2 wasn't just a climber, he was a symbol. And symbols don't get to make their own choices. Not when an entire country is watching. Muhammad Ali Sadpara was born in 1976 in a village called Sadpara, near Skardu in Pakistan's Gilgit-Baltistan region. That village sits at the base of the Karakoram. The mountains aren't a destination there, they're the landscape. They're what you see when you open your door. They're the reason your village has no road, no hospital, no reliable electricity. The mountains define everything. Your isolation, your poverty, and if you're Ali Sadpara, your entire future. He started climbing as a teenager. Not for sport. Not for Instagram. Not for sponsorships. He climbed because it was the only way out. In the Karakoram, the mountains are the economy. Foreign expeditions need porters. Porters carry loads to base camp and hire. The work is brutal. The pay is small. But for a kid from Sadpara village, it was the only paying work that existed. Ali started as a low-altitude porter. He carried loads for foreign climbers who arrived with $60,000 expedition budgets and equipment that cost more than his family earned in a decade. He watched them. He learned. And slowly, over years, he began to climb not as hired labor but as a mountaineer. This matters. Remember this detail, because it explains everything that came later. Ali Sadpara didn't come from the mountaineering establishment. He didn't train at a climbing academy. He didn't have wealthy parents who funded his first expedition. He built himself from nothing, in a country where climbing was something foreigners did and locals carried the bags. By 2016, Ali Sadpara had summited Nanga Parbat in winter. That alone would have made him legendary. Nanga Parbat, the 9th highest mountain on Earth, known as the Killer Mountain. A winter ascent is considered one of the most dangerous achievements in mountaineering. Ali did it on February 26, 2016, alongside Simone Moro and Alex Tikhon. He was the first Pakistani to summit an 8,000-meter peak in winter. Pakistan celebrated. The government awarded him the Pride of Performance, one of the highest civilian honors. Television cameras appeared in Sadpara village for the first time. The kid who carried bags for foreign climbers was now a national hero. But here's what nobody talks about. That award came with weight. That celebration came with expectation. Because Pakistan had never produced a mountaineer like Ali Sadpara, and now that they had one, they needed him to keep performing, keep summiting, keep proving that Pakistan belonged in the high-altitude conversation alongside Nepal, Europe, and the United States. Ali felt that pressure. People close to him have said it openly. He talked about it. The weight of being Pakistan's mountaineering hero in a country where mountaineering gets almost no funding, no infrastructure, no support system. He was expected to be world-class on a budget that wouldn't cover a European climber's gear bag. Between 2016 and 2020, Ali Sadpara summited multiple 8,000-meter peaks. He climbed Gasherbrum 1, he climbed Gasherbrum 2, he climbed Broad Peak, he climbed Lhotse, he climbed Makalu. He had already summited K2 in summer 2018 on a standard expedition with supplemental oxygen and full Sherpa support. But the summer summit wasn't enough. Not for Ali, not for Pakistan, because there was one prize left. One achievement that no human being had ever accomplished. A winter summit of K2. K2 had been attempted in winter dozens of times since 1987. Every single attempt had failed. The mountain in winter is almost incomprehensible. Temperatures drop below -60 degrees Celsius. Wind speeds exceed 200 kilometers per hour. The weather windows, if they exist at all, last hours, not days. The margin between summit and death narrows to almost nothing. No one had ever stood on K2's summit between December 1st and February 28th. Ever. In the entire history of mountaineering, Ali Sadpara wanted to be the first. And in the winter of 2021, he wasn't the only one. Because 10 days before Ali's summit push, a team of 10 Nepali climbers reached the summit of K2 in winter for the first time in history. January 16, 2021. The impossible had been done. K2 in winter had been climbed. But they were Nepali, not Pakistani. K2 sits in Pakistan. It is Pakistan's mountain. And a Nepali team had claimed the first winter summit. For Ali Sadpara, this changed everything. The achievement he had been working toward, the crowning glory of Pakistani mountaineering, had been taken by another country on Pakistani soil. What happened next? The decisions, the pressure, the fatal push that followed, can only be understood through this lens. Ali Sadpara didn't just want to climb K2 in winter. He needed to. Pakistan needed him to. And that need, that national hunger, would send him into K2's death zone on a night when every signal said stop. His sun would try to stop him. A broken oxygen regulator would try to stop him. The mountain itself would try to stop him. None of it was enough. To understand why, you need to know what was happening at base camp in the weeks before the summit push. Because the decisions that killed Ali Sadpara didn't start at 700-800 meters. They started at 5,000 meters, in a tent, with a weather forecast and a conversation between a father and son that neither of them fully understood would be one of their last. Chapter 2. The man they made into a symbol, Ali Sadpara's climbing career, didn't follow the path that Western mountaineering celebrates. There were no sponsorship deals in the early years. No documentary crews. No social media following. For the first 15 years of his climbing life, Ali Sadpara was invisible to the world. He was not invisible to the mountains. By his mid-20s, Ali had established himself as one of the strongest high-altitude workers in the Karakoram. Foreign expedition leaders began requesting him by name, not just as a porter. As a high-altitude support climber, the men who fix ropes, establish camps, break trail through deep snow and carry oxygen to the upper reaches where the paying clients need it most. These men do the hardest work on the mountain. They face the greatest risk. They get a fraction of the credit. Ali did this work for years. He watched foreign climbers, some excellent, some mediocre, stand on summits he had helped them reach. He carried their oxygen. He fixed their ropes. He cooked their meals at altitude. And then he watched them go home to book deals and speaking tours. He never complained about this publicly. But the people who knew him say it burned. Not with jealousy. With something more dangerous. With certainty. Ali knew he was better than most of the climbers he was supporting. He knew he could summit these peaks not as hired help, but as a mountaineer in his own right. The problem was money. The problem was always money. A Pakistani climber in the early 2000s had almost no pathway to independent expeditions. Permits for 8,000-meter peaks cost thousands of dollars. Equipment cost tens of thousands. Logistics, food, oxygen, insurance. The bill for a single expedition could exceed what Ali earned in 5 years of porter work. Western climbers had sponsors, savings accounts, crowdfunding campaigns. Ali had a village with no running water, and a family that depended on every rupee he earned. This is important. Write this into your understanding of everything that follows. Because when people ask why Ali Sadpara pushed so hard, why he took risks that seem irrational from the outside, why he kept climbing when others turned back, this is the foundation. He wasn't climbing from a position of privilege. He was climbing out of poverty. Every summit was a statement, every achievement was proof, and every failure sent him back to Sadpara village with nothing to show for months of suffering. The Nanga Parbat Winter Summit in 2016 changed everything. Suddenly, the porter from Skardu was on international news. The Pakistani government noticed. The military noticed. Sponsors, small ones, local ones, but sponsors nonetheless, began to appear. For the first time in his life, Ali Sadpara could plan his own expeditions instead of supporting someone else's. But here's the cruel math of Pakistani mountaineering sponsorship. The sponsors didn't fund Ali because they loved climbing. They funded him because he won. Because he summited. Because he produced results that could be celebrated on national television. The funding came with implicit conditions. Keep climbing. Keep summiting. Keep making Pakistan proud. Nobody ever told Ali Sadpara to take unnecessary risks. Nobody had to. The pressure was structural. It was built into every rupee of sponsorship money, every government award, every newspaper headline that called him a national hero. Heroes don't turn back. Heroes don't fail. Heroes summit. Between 2016 and 2020, Ali climbed with a ferocity that alarmed some in the mountaineering community. He was attempting multiple 8,000-meter peaks per year. He was climbing in conditions that more cautious mountaineers avoided. He was pushing timelines, compressing acclimatization schedules, accepting weather windows that others rejected. He got away with it, again and again. Because Ali Sadpara was genuinely exceptional, his body was built for altitude. His experience reading mountain conditions was decades deep. His pain tolerance was extraordinary. He could function at altitudes where other climbers became confused, clumsy, and eventually comatose. But being exceptional doesn't make you immortal. It makes you confident. And confidence at extreme altitude is the most dangerous thing a climber can carry. Now let me tell you about Sajid, because this story is as much about the son as the father. Sajid Ali Sadpara was born in 2000 or 2001. Records from the village are imprecise. He grew up watching his father leave for months at a time, return exhausted and sometimes injured, and then leave again. He grew up knowing that his father's work was the most dangerous job on earth, and he grew up wanting to do it too. Ali trained Sajid from childhood. Not formally. There are no climbing gyms in Sadpara village. He trained him the way his own father would have trained him to farm or herd goats, except the skill was surviving at 8,000 meters. Sajid learned to walk in crampons before most kids learned to ride bikes. He learned to read weather by watching clouds, not checking apps. He learned to carry weight at altitude, real weight, expedition loads, on steep ice, while he was still a teenager. By the time Sajid was 18, he had already climbed higher than most professional mountaineers ever will. Ali brought him on expeditions, first as support, then as a climbing partner. Father and son, roped together, moving through the death zone. If you're a parent watching this, sit with that for a moment. Ali Sadpara took his teenage son into environments where the human body begins to shut down, where one misstep means death, where rescue is impossible. He did this deliberately. He did this because he believed Sajid was ready, and he did this because he wanted Sajid to carry the legacy forward. Was that love? Was that recklessness? Was that a father giving his son the only inheritance he had? The mountains? The climbing community has argued about this for years. There is no clean answer. What we know is this. By 2020, Sajid was climbing at an elite level. He was young, strong, and had been raised at altitude. His acclimatization was natural, developed over a lifetime of living at the base of the Karakoram. In many ways, he was better suited to high-altitude climbing than his father had been at the same age. Ali saw this, and Ali saw an opportunity. The Winter K2 expedition of 2021 would be a father-son attempt, Pakistan's greatest mountaineer and his 20-year-old son, together on the most dangerous winter objective in mountaineering history. The symbolism was irresistible. The media loved it. The sponsors loved it. Pakistan loved it. But if you want to know why this story ends the way it does, look at the expedition's funding, look at the equipment, look at what Ali Sadpara could actually afford versus what a Winter K2 attempt actually requires. A properly funded Winter K2 expedition needs a budget of at least $500,000. Weather forecasting services, satellite communication, high-altitude oxygen systems, emergency evacuation plans, fully equipped high camps, experienced Sherpa support teams. The Nepali expedition that summited K2 on January 16th had all of this. They had 30 members, they had commercial backing, they had years of planning. Ali Sadpara's expedition had a fraction of that budget. Estimates vary, but credible sources suggest his total funding was somewhere between $50,000 and $80,000 for a Winter K2 attempt with his son. The oxygen equipment was not top tier. This is not speculation. This is documented in post-expedition analysis. The regulators used by Ali's team were not the same quality as those used by the Nepali team or by most Western commercial expeditions. They were functional. They were adequate for normal conditions. But Winter K2 is not normal conditions. At -50 degrees, with ice forming on every surface, with metal contracting in the cold, equipment tolerances matter. The difference between a regulator that works and one that fails can be a few degrees of temperature, a few grams of ice, a manufacturing variation so small it would pass any standard inspection. Sajid's regulator would fail at 700-800 meters, and that failure would separate father from son at the worst possible moment, on the worst possible mountain, in the worst possible season. But we're not there yet. Before the summit push, before the separation, before the disappearance, there was base camp. And at base camp, in January and February 2021, something was happening that would shape every decision Ali Sadpara made. The Nepali team was there, and they were about to do something historic. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because what happened between the Nepali summit and Ali Sadpara's fatal push is a story that most documentaries skip entirely. They treat these as separate events. They were not. The Nepali summit on January 16th didn't just make history. It rewrote Ali Sadpara's expedition plan. It accelerated his timeline. And it may have cost him his life. On January 16, 2021, 10 Nepali climbers stood on the summit of K2. For the first time ever, the mountain had been climbed in winter. The world celebrated. The Nepali team, led by Nirmal Purja and organized by Mingma Gyalje Sherpa, had achieved what many considered impossible. Ali Sadpara watched this happen from base camp. He was there. He saw the celebrations. He heard the satellite phones ringing with congratulations from Kathmandu, from Islamabad, from around the world. And he understood immediately what this meant for him. The first winter ascent was gone. Taken. Claimed by Nepal. Ali could still be the first Pakistani to summit K2 in winter. That achievement was still available. But it was smaller now. Second place. The footnote, not the headline. And for a man who had spent his entire career fighting to prove that Pakistanis could compete at the highest level of mountaineering, second place wasn't enough. People close to Ali have described what the Nepali summit did to the mood at base camp. It was electric, not with joy, with urgency, with pressure. Pakistani media immediately began asking, when would Ali summit? Would he match the Nepali achievement? Would Pakistan's mountain be conquered by a Pakistani? Ali began adjusting his plan. The original timeline called for extensive acclimatization rotations, climbing to high camps and returning to base, building the body's tolerance for altitude over weeks. Ali compressed this. He began pushing higher, faster. He wanted to be ready for the first viable weather window after the Nepali success. Some climbers at base camp noticed. Some commented privately that Ali seemed rushed, that his preparation felt abbreviated, that the father-son team was moving with a urgency that didn't match the conditions. No one said this to Ali directly, because Ali Sadpara was not a man you questioned. His experience was beyond challenge. His reputation was beyond reproach. If Ali said he was ready, he was ready. Except he might not have been, and neither was his equipment. The weather window that Ali chose for his summit push opened on February 4th. It was tight. Maybe 36 hours of manageable conditions before the next storm system arrived. Most winter expeditions wait for wider windows. Ali didn't wait. He couldn't wait. Every day at base camp was another day of Pakistani media, asking why a Nepali team had climbed Pakistan's mountain before a Pakistani had. February 4th. Ali, Sajid, Juan Pablo Moore, and John Snorri Sigurd Johnson began their summit push. 4 climbers from 4 countries. 1 mountain, 1 window, and equipment that had not been tested in the conditions they were about to face. What happened over the next 36 hours would devastate Pakistan, destroy a family, and leave 3 bodies somewhere on K2 that the mountain has never given back. And at the center of all of it, a 20-year-old son who would have to make the hardest decision of his life at nearly 8,000 meters, in the dark, in the cold, with his father's voice telling him to go down. That moment is coming, and when it arrives, you'll understand why Ali Sadpara has never been the same. Chapter 3. The Race That Created a Death Trap. The 2021 winter season on K2 was not a normal climbing season. It was a competition. And competitions create pressure. Pressure creates bad decisions. Bad decisions at 8,000 meters create corpses. To understand what drove Ali Sadpara up that mountain on February 4th, you have to understand the politics of winter K2. This wasn't just mountaineering. This was geopolitics played out on an ice wall. For decades, K2 in winter had been the last great prize in high-altitude mountaineering. Every other 8,000-meter peak had been climbed in winter. Everest, Kangchenjunga, Lhotse, Makalu, Nanga Parbat. All of them had fallen to winter expeditions. K2 was the holdout, the impossible one. The mountain that winter could not be beaten on. Multiple nations had tried. Polish teams, historically the strongest winter mountaineers on Earth, had attempted K2 in winter repeatedly. 1987, 1988, 2003, 2018. All failed. Russians had tried. Kazakhs had tried. International teams had tried. The mountain rejected them all. By 2020, K2 in winter had become more than a climbing objective. It was a symbol. Whoever climbed it first would make history. And history in mountaineering translates to national pride, sponsorship money, speaking tours, book deals, and permanent legacy. Multiple teams planned expeditions for the 2020-2021 winter season. The Nepali team was the largest and best funded. They had corporate sponsorship. They had 30 members, including some of the strongest high-altitude climbers alive. They had Nirmal Purja, a former Gurkha soldier turned mountaineering celebrity who had already climbed all 14 8,000-meter peaks in 7 months, a record that made him one of the most famous climbers on the planet. Ali Sadpara's team was tiny by comparison. 4 climbers, minimal support staff, a budget that wouldn't cover the Nepali team's oxygen supply alone. But Ali had something the Nepali team didn't. He was Pakistani. K2 was his mountain, his country's mountain, and he believed that mattered. Here's where most people misunderstand this story. They think Ali Sadpara was competing against the Nepali team. He wasn't. Not directly. He was competing against a narrative. The narrative that Pakistani mountaineers couldn't compete at the highest level. That Pakistan's mountains were playgrounds for foreign climbers, while Pakistanis carried the bags. Ali had spent his entire career fighting that narrative. Every summit was a counter-argument. Every achievement was evidence. And a winter K2 summit, the hardest mountaineering objective on Earth, would be the ultimate proof. But the Nepali team got there first. January 16, 2021. 10 Nepali climbers on the summit. History made. Celebrations worldwide. And at K2 Base Camp, Ali Sadpara's expedition suddenly shifted from historic first to following in someone else's footsteps. The psychological impact of this cannot be overstated. People who were at base camp that January described the change in Ali's demeanor. Not dramatic, not angry, something quieter. A tightening, a resolve that hardened beyond reason. Ali stopped talking about the summit as an aspiration. He started talking about it as an obligation. Pakistan's media amplified this. Social media was relentless. When will Ali summit? Pakistan's hero on Pakistan's mountain. Will a Pakistani follow the Nepali achievement? The pressure was invisible but crushing. It came from every direction. Television, newspapers, social media, government officials who called base camp to encourage Ali. No one told Ali to rush. Everyone told Ali to succeed. There's a difference. One you can refuse, the other gets inside your bones. Now let me tell you about Ali's partners on the summit push. Because they matter. Their decisions intertwined with Ali's. Their fates were sealed together. Juan Pablo Moore was Chilean, 33 years old. Handsome, charismatic, with a growing social media following that was turning him into South America's most visible mountaineer. Juan Pablo had already climbed Everest and several other 8,000-meter peaks. K2 in winter was his next statement piece. He was ambitious, talented, and, according to some who climbed with him, sometimes moved faster than his experience justified. Juan Pablo and Ali had developed a partnership at base camp. They trained together. They shared weather data. They planned their summit push as a team. Juan Pablo brought energy and optimism. Ali brought experience and route knowledge. It seemed like a strong pairing. John Snorri Sigurd Johnson was Icelandic, 47 years old. A former search and rescue volunteer who had transitioned into high-altitude mountaineering later in life. John had attempted K2 before, 3 times in summer, never reaching the summit. K2 was his obsession. Winter K2 was his ultimate dream. He had spent years preparing for this specific expedition. John was the quietest of the group. Methodical, careful by reputation. But he had a blind spot that would prove fatal. He trusted Ali Sadpara's judgment completely. If Ali said the conditions were climbable, John believed him. That trust wasn't misplaced based on Ali's track record. But track records mean nothing when the variables change, and winter K2 changed every variable. The 4 climbers, Ali, Sajid, Juan Pablo, and John, planned their summit push for early February. They had spent weeks acclimatizing, rotating through the lower camps, testing equipment, monitoring weather. The process was compressed compared to the Nepali team's timeline. But Ali argued that his experience and natural acclimatization, having lived at altitude his entire life, compensated for the shorter preparation. Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't. We'll never know for certain. Because the factor that killed this expedition wasn't acclimatization. It was equipment. And timing. And a weather window that was narrower than anyone admitted. The weather forecast for February 4th, 5th showed a brief window. Winds would drop below 50 kilometers per hour, above 8,000 meters. Temperatures would remain extreme, -50 to -60 at summit altitude, but the wind reduction made a summit attempt theoretically possible. Theoretically. The Nepali team had waited for a wider window. Multiple days of reduced wind. Time to establish high camps properly. Time to fix ropes to the summit. Time for error. Ali's window was tighter. Maybe 30 hours. Maybe less. The forecast models disagreed on exactly when the wind would return. Some showed 36 hours of moderate conditions. Others showed 24. Ali chose to go on the optimistic forecast. This is documented. Multiple people at base camp have confirmed that Ali was presented with conflicting weather data and chose the model that gave him more time. This wasn't reckless by mountaineering standards. Climbers choose between forecast models constantly. The optimistic model isn't automatically wrong. But on winter K2, where the margin between life and death is measured in hours, not days, choosing the optimistic model means choosing to bet your life on the best-case scenario. Ali was betting 4 lives, including his son's. On February 3rd, the team moved to Camp 3 at approximately 7,300 meters. They rested during the day. They checked equipment. They melted snow for water. They prepared for the summit push that would begin after midnight. Sajid later described this afternoon at Camp 3 as quiet. Ali was focused, not talkative. He went through equipment checks methodically. He tested his oxygen system. He tested Sajid's oxygen system. Here's a detail that will become critical. When Ali tested the oxygen regulators at Camp 3, they worked. Both of them. The temperature at Camp 3 was approximately -35 degrees Celsius. The regulators functioned at -35. But between Camp 3 and the summit, the temperature would drop another 20 to 25 degrees. The regulators had not been tested at -55 or -60. Nobody tested them at those temperatures. Nobody even discussed whether the equipment was rated for those conditions. This is the gap. The space between what was checked and what needed to be checked. The overlooked detail that would crack open this expedition like a fault line. If you're watching this and thinking, why didn't they test it properly? Subscribe now, because that question leads somewhere most people don't expect. The answer isn't just about Ali's expedition. It's about the entire system of mountaineering equipment supply in Pakistan, the cost-cutting that budget expeditions force, and the assumption that equipment rated for extreme altitude will function in conditions that go beyond extreme. At approximately midnight on February 4th, the 4 climbers left Camp 3. Ali first. Then Sajid. Then Juan Pablo. Then John. Single file. Headlamps cutting the darkness. Moving upward into the bottleneck, the most dangerous section of K2's standard route. The bottleneck is a steep couloir at approximately 8,200 meters, directly beneath a massive overhanging serac, a wall of glacial ice the size of a building that can collapse without warning. Climbers must pass through this couloir quickly. Every minute spent in the bottleneck is a minute spent beneath hanging death. The 2008 K2 disaster killed 11 people when a serac collapsed in this exact section. Ali knew the bottleneck. He had passed through it before, in summer 2018. But summer and winter are different planets. In summer, the bottleneck is dangerous. In winter, it is almost unclimbable. The ice is harder. The ropes, if any exist, are buried under meters of frozen snow. The cold makes every movement slower, more laborious. And the serac above is under greater stress, contracted by cold, more prone to fracture. They started climbing. The night was clear. The wind was manageable. For the first 2 hours, everything went according to plan. They gained altitude steadily. Ali set the pace, deliberate, measured, conserving energy for the push above 8,000 meters. And then, at approximately 7,800 meters, Sajid's oxygen regulator failed. That moment, that single mechanical failure, would determine who lived and who died on K2 that night. And the conversation that followed between a father and his son, in the dark, in the cold, at the edge of the death zone, would become the most analyzed exchange in Pakistani mountaineering history. What Ali said to Sajid, what Sajid said back, and why Ali Sadpara chose the summit over his son's safety. That conversation happened somewhere around 2 or 3 in the morning. No one else heard it clearly. The wind carried words away. Juan Pablo and John were climbing nearby but focused on their own survival. The only people who know exactly what was said are Sajid and Ali, who can never tell us. Chapter 4. The night everything went dark. Sajid felt the change before he understood it. The oxygen flow through his mask stuttered, then stopped, then stuttered again. He checked the regulator. His gloved fingers, thick, clumsy in the cold, fumbled with the mechanism. Ice had formed around the valve. He cleared it. The flow resumed for 30 seconds, then died again. He was at 7,800 meters. The temperature was somewhere around -55°C. His body was consuming oxygen at a rate his lungs could barely sustain even with supplemental flow. Without the regulator, his blood oxygen saturation would begin dropping immediately. Within minutes, his thinking would slow. Within an hour, he would lose coordination. Within 2 hours, at that altitude, without supplemental oxygen, his organs would begin to fail. Sajid tried again. He pulled the regulator off the bottle. He cleared ice from every surface he could reach. He reattached it. Nothing. The mechanism was frozen solid. The cold had contracted the metal components beyond their operational tolerance. The regulator was dead. He called to his father. Ali stopped climbing. He descended the few meters back to Sajid. He examined the regulator himself. He tried the same clearing procedure Sajid had tried. Same result. Nothing. What happened next has been reconstructed from Sajid's own accounts, given in multiple interviews over the following months and years. His telling has been consistent on the key points, though some details have varied, which is expected from a person recounting a traumatic experience at extreme altitude. According to Sajid, he told his father that his oxygen was finished, that the regulator couldn't be fixed, that he needed to go down. Ali's response, according to Sajid, was immediate. He told Sajid to descend, not a suggestion, an instruction. Go down. Now. Get to Camp 3. But then Sajid asked his father to come with him. This is the moment. This is the decision point that has been debated, analyzed, agonized over, and second-guessed by every mountaineer, every Pakistani, every parent who has heard this story. Ali said no. He told Sajid he was continuing to the summit. According to Sajid, Ali said he was strong enough to continue, that the summit was close, that the weather was holding, that he would summit and descend, that Sajid should go down and wait. Sajid argued. He begged. At 7,800 meters, in the dark, with his oxygen gone, a 20-year-old son begged his 45-year-old father to come down. Ali Sadpara did not come down. He turned and continued climbing upward, into the darkness, toward the bottleneck, toward the summit that had consumed his life for years, toward the history he had been told his country needed from him. Sajid watched his father's headlamp move up the mountain, getting smaller, getting fainter, eventually disappearing into the black. Then Sajid turned around and began the most terrifying descent of his life. Think about this. 20 years old, no supplemental oxygen. Alone on K2 in winter, in the dark, descending technical terrain that kills people in perfect conditions. His father climbing away from him. His partners, Juan Pablo and John, somewhere above him, continuing with Ali. Sajid descended through the night. He reached Camp 3 alive. This alone is an extraordinary achievement. Descending from 7,800 meters on K2 in winter without oxygen, alone, in darkness, requires a level of physical toughness and mental composure that borders on superhuman. Sajid Sadpara was 20 years old and he pulled it off. At Camp 3 he waited. He had no satellite phone. It was with his father. He had no way to contact base camp. He was alone in a tent at 7,300 meters with no information about what was happening above him. He waited through the night. He waited through the next morning. No one came down. Eventually, Sajid continued his descent to base camp. When he arrived and reported what had happened, the reality set in. Ali, Juan Pablo, and John were still somewhere above 700-800 meters. They had been up there for over 18 hours. At that altitude, in those temperatures, with the weather window closing, 18 hours was too long. Now, here's what was happening above while Sajid descended. And this is where the story gets uncertain, because nobody survived to tell it. Based on satellite tracking data, last known GPS positions, and analysis of conditions, climbing experts have reconstructed the most likely sequence of events. What follows is the best understanding available, but it is reconstruction, not eyewitness testimony. The mountain has kept its secrets. Ali, Juan Pablo, and John continued climbing after Sajid's departure. They entered the bottleneck sometime between 3 o'clock and 4 a.m. on February 5th. At this point, all three were functioning on supplemental oxygen. Ali's and John's regulators were still working. The temperatures were extreme, but the wind was holding within the forecast window. The trio would have needed to pass through the bottleneck, traverse above it, and then climb the summit pyramid, the final steep section leading to K2's peak at 8,611 meters. In summer, this section takes approximately 4 to 6 hours from the top of the bottleneck. In winter, it could take 8 or more. The weather window was closing. The optimistic forecast Ali had chosen gave them until late afternoon on February 5th before winds returned to unsurvivable speeds. If they left the bottleneck at 4 a.m., they needed to summit by noon and begin descending immediately. Any delay, exhaustion, route-finding difficulties, equipment issues would push them into the closing window. Multiple analysis reports suggest that the trio likely reached a point between 8,200 and 8,400 meters. Whether they reached the summit is unknown. Some analysts believe they may have topped out. Others believe they were caught by deteriorating conditions before reaching the peak. Without survivors, without GPS data from the final hours, without recovered equipment, the answer may never be known. What is known is that they did not descend. By the afternoon of February 5th, conditions on K2's upper reaches deteriorated rapidly. Wind speeds increased. Visibility dropped. The weather window slammed shut with the force of a hurricane. Any climber above 8,000 meters when that happened would have been trapped, unable to descend safely, unable to survive where they were. Ali Sadpara, Juan Pablo Moore, and John Snorri Sigurd Johnson were somewhere in that zone when winter reclaimed the mountain. The most likely scenario, according to mountaineering analysts, is that they were caught in deteriorating conditions during their descent from high on the mountain. Disorientation in whiteout conditions, exhaustion after 20 or more hours of climbing, oxygen running low or out, temperatures beyond human survival without shelter. Any one of these factors alone is survivable with luck. All of them together, at that altitude, in winter. The outcome is certain. They may have fallen. They may have sat down and never gotten up. They may have been swept off the mountain by wind. They may have succumbed to hypothermia in minutes once they stopped moving. We don't know. K2 won't tell us. What we know is the silence. The horrible, expanding silence as hours passed at base camp with no radio contact. No GPS signal. No headlamps visible on the upper mountain. Just the wind, the mountain, and the growing certainty that 3 men were dead. At base camp, the mood shifted from concern to dread to grief in stages. The first 12 hours were anxious. The next 12 were desperate. By the time 48 hours had passed with no contact, no movement, no signal, everyone at base camp understood. Sajid understood before anyone told him. He had descended from 700-800 meters knowing what that altitude does to people who stay too long. He had watched his father disappear into the dark. He had done the math. Every mountaineer does the math. Hours of oxygen remaining. Hours until weather deteriorates. Hours until the body shuts down. The math always tells the truth. And the math said Ali Sadpara was dead. But knowing isn't the same as accepting. And accepting isn't the same as grieving. Sajid's grief would come later. At base camp, in the hours and days after his father's disappearance, what Sajid experienced was something worse than grief. It was helplessness. His father was dying, or already dead, somewhere above him on a mountain he had just descended. He could see the upper slopes from base camp. He could see the snow plumes ripping off the summit ridge. His father was in that. And there was nothing, absolutely nothing, he could do. Rescue attempts were discussed and abandoned almost immediately. Nobody could reach 8,000 meters on K2 in winter to search for 3 missing climbers. Helicopters cannot fly reliably at that altitude. Ground teams would face the same conditions that had killed the missing climbers. Any rescue attempt would simply create more victims. This is the brutal arithmetic of extreme altitude. When people die in the death zone, they stay in the death zone. The living cannot reach them. The mountain becomes the grave. February 5th passed. February 6th passed. February 7th. Each day with no contact confirmed what everyone already knew. On February 18th, nearly 2 weeks after the disappearance, the Pakistani government officially declared Ali Sadpara, Juan Pablo Moore, and John Snorri Sigurjonsson missing, presumed dead. Ali Sadpara was 45 years old. He left behind a wife, 3 sons, and a daughter. He left behind a country that had called him a hero and now had to call him a victim. He left behind a 20-year-old son who had survived K2's winter death zone and would carry the weight of that survival for the rest of his life. Juan Pablo Moore was 33. He left behind a partner and a growing legacy in Chilean mountaineering. He had been documenting his expedition on social media. His last post, from base camp, showed him smiling. The comments on that post, after his disappearance was confirmed, numbered in the thousands. John Snorri was 47. He had attempted K2 4 times over his career. The 4th time killed him. He left behind family in Iceland and friends across the climbing community who described him as the most determined person they had ever known. Determination and survival are not the same thing. 3 men. 3 countries. 1 mountain. No bodies. Sajid was left to explain what happened. A 20-year-old kid. Exhausted, traumatized, grieving. Standing in front of cameras and microphones that wanted answers he didn't have. The world wanted to know, why didn't Ali come down with his son? Why did he continue? Who made the decision? Could it have been prevented? Every question was a knife. And Sajid had to answer them all. Chapter 5. A Son Alone. The first interview Sajid gave after returning to Skardu was to Pakistani media. He was visibly shattered. His face was gaunt. His eyes had the unfocused quality of someone who hasn't slept in days, or someone who has seen something they cannot process. He sat in front of cameras and answered questions in Urdu, his voice flat, his hands still. He told the story simply. The oxygen regulator failed. His father told him to descend. His father continued climbing. That was the last time he saw Ali Sadpara alive. The Pakistani public received this story with immediate, overwhelming grief. Ali Sadpara wasn't just a climber. He was a national symbol in a country that has few of them in international sport. His death, his disappearance, his body unclaimed by family, his final moments unknown, struck Pakistan with a force that transcended mountaineering. The government responded quickly. President Arif Alvi posthumously awarded Ali Sadpara the Hilali Pakistan, the Crescent of Pakistan, one of the country's highest civilian honors. Government officials made statements. The Pakistani military arranged aerial searches using helicopters and drones, though everyone involved acknowledged that the chances of locating bodies at those altitudes were essentially zero. And in the middle of all of this, the national mourning, the military helicopters, the presidential awards, there was Sajid, a 20-year-old kid from a village with no electricity, standing at the center of a national tragedy, being asked to be the voice of his father's legacy while processing the fact that his father was dead because of a decision made at 700-800 meters in the dark. If you're watching this and you feel something for Sajid right now, that's the point. Because what happened to him after K2 is a story that gets told less often than his father's death, and it matters just as much. In the weeks after the disappearance, Sajid faced questions that no grieving son should have to answer. Not just from media, from the climbing community, from analysts, from armchair mountaineers around the world who felt entitled to opinions about his father's decision. Why didn't Ali descend with his son? Why did a father leave his son alone at 700-800 meters? Was Ali being reckless? Was the expedition underfunded? Were the oxygen regulators substandard? Should Sajid have refused to let his father continue? Could Sajid have done more? Each question carries an implicit accusation. That Ali was negligent, that Sajid was complicit, that someone, father or son, should have made a different choice. And Sajid, barely out of his teenage years, had to navigate these accusations while grieving. His answers were consistent, but evolved over time. In early interviews, Sajid spoke simply and directly. The regulator broke. He went down. His father went up. In later interviews, months and years after the event, he began to add layers. He talked about the pressure his father felt. He talked about the Nepali summit and what it did to Ali's mindset. He talked about the weather window and how tight it was. He talked about the moment of separation with more detail, what his father's face looked like, what his voice sounded like, the last words exchanged. Some observers noted inconsistencies between early and later accounts. This led to speculation, unfair speculation. According to psychologists who study trauma at altitude, memory at extreme altitude is unreliable under the best circumstances. The brain is oxygen deprived. The cold affects cognitive function. Stress hormones flood the system. People who survive life-threatening situations at 8,000 meters routinely give accounts that shift over time, not because they're lying, but because memory at altitude is fragmented, and the brain fills gaps differently at different stages of processing. Sajid wasn't lying about what happened. He was remembering an event that occurred under conditions the human brain isn't designed to function in. And each time he told the story, his brain was simultaneously trying to make sense of something senseless. There's another layer here that most coverage ignores. Sajid's survival created a specific kind of psychological burden that climbers call survivor's guilt, but which, in Sajid's case, goes beyond that clinical term. He didn't just survive while others died. He survived because his equipment broke. If his regulator had worked, he would have been with his father at 200 meters and above. He would have been in the death zone when the weather closed. He would almost certainly have died alongside Ali, Juan Pablo, and John. The thing that saved his life, the regulator failure, was also the thing that separated him from his father. His survival wasn't a choice. It was an accident, a malfunction, a piece of metal that froze and, by freezing, kept him alive. Try carrying that. Try being 20 years old and knowing that a broken piece of equipment is the reason you're breathing and your father isn't. Try reconciling the gratitude of being alive with the guilt of not being on that mountain when your father needed you. Sajid has spoken about this, sparingly. He doesn't dramatize it. He states it plainly, the way his father would have, direct, without self-pity. But the weight is visible. It shows in his face during interviews. It shows in his eyes when someone asks about that night. It shows in what he did next. The search operations continued through February and into early March. Pakistani military helicopters conducted multiple flyovers of K2's upper sections, scanning for any sign of the missing climbers. Drones were deployed. High-resolution imagery was captured of the slopes between 7,500 and 8,500 meters. Nothing was found. Or rather, shapes were seen, anomalies in the snow that might be equipment or might be nothing. At those altitudes from aircraft, every shadow could be a body, and every rock could be a pack. The resolution wasn't fine enough to confirm anything. Ground searches were impossible. It was still winter. The conditions that killed Ali, Juan Pablo, and John hadn't improved. Sending climbers to 8,000 meters to search for bodies would be sending them to die. The families waited. Ali's wife, in Sadpara village, waited for news that never came. Juan Pablo's partner in Chile waited. John's family in Iceland waited. 3 families. 3 countries. One mountain holding their loved ones somewhere in its frozen mass, refusing to reveal where. In Chile, Juan Pablo Moore's disappearance generated its own wave of grief and investigation. The Chilean mountaineering community demanded answers. Juan Pablo's social media following, tens of thousands of people who had watched him climb in real time, struggled with the sudden silence of an account that had been posting daily. His last Instagram post remains up. It has become a memorial. Comments are still being left on it years later. In Iceland, John Snorri's community mourned quietly. He was less public than Juan Pablo, less of a national symbol than Ali, but his loss was felt deeply in Iceland's small climbing community. He had been their most ambitious mountaineer. His 4 attempts on K2 were well known. The 4th, in winter, had been described as his, quote, final chance by those who knew him. That phrase took on terrible new meaning. If you're still watching this, you need to subscribe to this channel, because what I'm about to tell you about the equipment, the investigation, and what Sajid discovered when he looked into his father's expedition funding, that's the part nobody else covers. That's the part that explains not just why Ali died, but why the system that sent him to K2 is still sending climbers to their deaths. The formal investigation into the disappearance was limited. Pakistan does not have a dedicated mountaineering accident investigation body comparable to aviation accident investigation boards. The inquiry was conducted by the Alpine Club of Pakistan and relied heavily on Sajid's testimony, base camp communications logs, weather data, and satellite tracking information. The findings were straightforward. The 3 climbers were last tracked at approximately 8,200 to 8,400 meters. The weather window closed as forecast. The most likely cause of death was exposure and exhaustion at extreme altitude during deteriorating conditions. Contributing factors included the compressed preparation timeline and the oxygen regulator failure that split the team. The investigation did not deeply examine the quality of the oxygen equipment. It did not investigate the funding pressure on Ali's expedition. It did not analyze whether the Nepali summit altered Ali's decision-making timeline. It did not assess whether the weather forecast models were adequate for winter conditions. These gaps are not unusual. Mountain investigations in Pakistan and Nepal are typically limited in scope. The mountains are in remote regions. Evidence is inaccessible. There is no commercial aviation-style mandate to investigate every death. And the mountaineering industry, which generates significant revenue for both countries, has little incentive to publicize systemic failures. But the gaps matter. Because the questions they leave unanswered are the questions that could prevent the next death. Why was equipment not rated for winter K2 temperatures used on a winter K2 expedition? Who supplied the regulators? Were they tested for the specific conditions they would encounter? Is there a certification standard for oxygen equipment used above 8,000 meters in winter? Who enforces it? The answers to these questions are uncomfortable, because the answer to most of them is nobody. No certification, no testing standard, no enforcement. Climbers bring whatever equipment they can afford, and the mountain decides whether it's good enough. Ali Sadpara could afford equipment that was good enough for summer. It wasn't good enough for winter, and nobody told him, or if they did, nobody stopped him from using it anyway. Chapter 6. The Questions That Won't Go Away. In the months and years after Ali Sadpara's disappearance, a series of uncomfortable truths emerged. Not through any single investigation. Through fragments. Through interviews. Through analysis by climbing experts who looked at the 2021 winter season on K2 and saw patterns that the official narrative obscured. The first uncomfortable truth was about oxygen. After the expedition, independent mountaineering analysts examined what was known about the oxygen systems used by Ali's team. The specific brand and model of regulator used by Sajid, the one that failed at 7,800 meters, was identified through photographs taken during the expedition and Sajid's own descriptions. The regulator was a model commonly used on 8,000-meter peaks. It was functional. It was not defective in any standard sense. But it was designed for conditions where temperatures rarely drop below -40 degrees Celsius. On K2 in winter, at 7,800 meters, the temperature was approximately 15 to 20 degrees colder than the regulator's effective operating range. This wasn't a secret. The specifications were available. The temperature ratings were printed in the manufacturer's documentation, but those specifications exist in a technical manual that most climbers never read. And expedition budgets determine equipment choices more often than engineering specifications do. A top-tier oxygen regulator system, the kind used by well-funded commercial Everest expeditions and the Nepali K2 winter team, costs significantly more. These systems are designed for extended use in extreme cold. They have wider tolerances. They resist icing. They function at temperatures that the cheaper alternatives cannot handle. Ali's expedition could not afford the top-tier systems, so they used what they could afford. And what they could afford worked in every condition except the one they encountered. If you're thinking that's not Ali's fault, you're right. And if you're thinking someone should have told him, you're also right. And if you're thinking the system that allows climbers to bring inadequate equipment to the most dangerous mountain in the world is broken, you're exactly right. But broken systems don't fix themselves. And in the 4 years since Ali Sadpara's death, the system has not been fixed. Climbers still bring budget equipment to extreme altitude. Permits are still issued without equipment inspection. There is no governing body that certifies oxygen systems for specific mountains in specific seasons. The market determines what climbers carry, and the market favors whatever is cheapest. The second uncomfortable truth was about the weather window. After the expedition, meteorologists who had been providing forecasts for the winter 2021 season published detailed analyses of the conditions on February 4th -5th. Their conclusion was not reassuring. The weather window that Ali chose was real. Conditions did improve briefly, but the window was at the extreme minimum of what would be needed for a K2 summit from Camp 3. Multiple forecast models had disagreed on the duration. The most conservative model gave a window of approximately 20 hours. The most optimistic gave 36. Ali chose the optimistic model. If the conservative model was correct, and post-event analysis suggests it was closer to reality, then the window closed before Ali's team could have summited and descended. They would have been caught regardless of whether they summited. This means the decision to go was flawed from the beginning. Not because Ali was reckless. Because the data was ambiguous, and Ali chose the interpretation that allowed him to climb. This is a human decision, a normal decision, the kind of decision every mountaineer makes. But on winter K2, normal decisions can be fatal. The third uncomfortable truth was about pressure. And this one is the hardest to quantify, but perhaps the most important. After Ali's death, people close to him began speaking about the pressure he felt following the Nepali summit. Not publicly at first. In private conversations. In climbing forums. In whispered discussions at mountaineering events. Gradually, a picture emerged of a man who felt he could not come home without the summit. Not because anyone explicitly told him so. Because everything in his world implied it. The sponsors who funded him expected results. The government that decorated him expected more achievements. The media that celebrated him expected the next headline. The nation that claimed him as a hero expected heroism. And heroes don't turn back. This is the most insidious form of pressure. It doesn't come from a single source. It comes from everywhere. It's ambient. It's atmospheric. It seeps into your decision-making like cold seeps into your bones. You don't feel yourself changing. You just find yourself making choices you wouldn't have made without it. Ali Sadpara was too experienced to be reckless. He was too skilled to make obvious mistakes. What killed him was subtler than recklessness. It was the invisible narrowing of his acceptable outcomes until only one remained: the summit. A climber who can accept failure has options. A climber who cannot accept failure has only one path. And that path, on winter K2, leads to death. There's a fourth uncomfortable truth, and this one involves the Nepali summit itself. Not to diminish that achievement. It was historic and extraordinary, but the manner in which it was achieved created a dynamic at base camp that affected every climber there. The Nepali team summited using a massive, well-funded, cooperative effort. 30 climbers working together. Fixed ropes to the summit. Multiple high camps fully stocked. Supplemental oxygen for the entire route. Sherpa support at every stage. It was a siege-style expedition, the kind of large-scale assault that maximizes the chance of success. Ali's team was attempting the same mountain in the same season with a fraction of the resources. 4 climbers. Minimal fixed ropes above Camp 3. Limited oxygen. No Sherpa support team above base camp. The Nepali success made the summit seem achievable. It was achieved. But it was achieved with resources that Ali didn't have. The Nepali team's success created a psychological framework. It can be done, without the accompanying reality check. It can be done with these resources, and only these resources. Ali saw the Nepali summit and concluded that he could do it too. He probably could have, with the same resources. Without them, the odds shifted dramatically against him. But the proof of concept was there. K2 in winter was possible. All Ali needed was a weather window and the will to go. He had both. What he didn't have was the margin for error that the Nepali team's resources provided. And on K2 in winter, the margin for error is the difference between life and death. Now let me address something that the climbing community has debated intensely since 2021. The question of whether Ali Sadpara should have descended with his son when Sajid's regulator failed. The arguments on both sides are legitimate. Those who say Ali should have descended argue that a father's first responsibility is to his child. That continuing upward after your climbing partner's equipment fails is against basic mountaineering protocol. That Ali's summit ambition overrode his parental judgment. That Sajid, at 20 years old, should never have been left alone at 700-800 meters on K2 in winter. Those who defend Ali's decision argue differently. They point out that Sajid was a capable, experienced climber who had already demonstrated he could handle the descent. That Ali's oxygen was still functioning, making his continued ascent defensible from a technical standpoint. That the summit window was closing and might not reopen, meaning this was Ali's only chance. That in the high-altitude mountaineering world, climbers routinely make independent decisions about whether to continue or descend. Both arguments are correct, and both miss the point. The point is that Ali Sadpara should never have been in a position where that choice existed. If the oxygen equipment had been adequate, Sajid's regulator wouldn't have failed, and the father-son team would have continued together. If the expedition had been properly funded, backup regulators would have been available. If the pressure to summit hadn't been so intense, Ali might have taken the regulator failure as a sign to descend, rather than a reason to separate. The decision that killed Ali wasn't made at 700-800 meters. It was made in the months and years before, through 1,000 small compromises, financial, logistical, psychological, that narrowed his options until only one remained. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. What comes next? Sajid's return to K2 and what it tells us about grief, legacy, and the impossible weight of a father's name is something I've spent weeks researching. You won't find this depth anywhere else. The family's experiences after the disappearance deserve attention, not because they're peripheral to the story, but because they are the story. Ali Sadpara's climbing career was driven by his family, his village, his community. Everything he did on the mountains was tethered to the people below. Ali's wife remained in Sadpara village. The Pakistani government provided financial support. How much and for how long has never been publicly confirmed. The village itself became something of a pilgrimage site. Climbers, journalists, and admirers visited. A memorial was discussed. Ali's name was attached to roads and facilities. But memorials don't raise children. Awards don't replace a father. And the celebrity of death fades. Within 2 years, the national attention had moved on. The village was quiet again. The mountains still had no electricity. And Ali's family was navigating the mundane cruelty of grief in a place where life was already hard before tragedy arrived. Juan Pablo Moore's partner in Chile created a foundation in his name. John Snorri's family in Iceland grieved privately. 3 families, 3 countries, 3 different ways of processing the same loss, united only by the mountain that holds their loved ones and won't let go. Chapter 7. The son who went back in July 2021, 5 months after watching his father disappear into K2's darkness. Sajid Ali Sadpara returned to the mountain. Not in winter, in summer, not to summit, to search. He went back to look for his father's body. Think about that. 20 years old, 5 months since the worst night of his life. He went back to the mountain that killed his father, climbed back into the death zone where he had last seen Ali alive, and searched the slopes for any sign of the man who told him to go down. He didn't find him. K2 had already hidden what it took. Snow and ice and wind had erased whatever traces remained. The mountain gives nothing back willingly. But Sajid did something else on that trip. He summited K2. In summer, without his father, carrying a weight that had nothing to do with his pack. He stood on the summit that Ali Sadpara never reached, and looked out at the view his father died trying to see. Was that closure? Was that tribute? Was that defiance? Sajid has been asked this question 100 times. His answers vary. Sometimes he says he did it for his father. Sometimes he says he did it for Pakistan. Sometimes he says he doesn't fully understand why he did it. Sometimes he just goes quiet. The climbing community didn't know how to respond. Some praised Sajid's courage. Some questioned his judgment. Returning to the mountain that killed your father 5 months later, at age 20. Some saw it as a testament to Ali's training. Some saw it as evidence that the same pressures that pushed Ali were already pushing his son. All of these reactions contained truth. None of them contained the whole truth. Because the whole truth of Sajid Sadpara's relationship with K2 is something only Sajid understands, and he may not fully understand it himself. Since 2021, Sajid has continued climbing. He has summited multiple 8,000-meter peaks. He is building a career as a professional mountaineer in his own right. He has sponsors now. He has media attention. He has the name Sadpara that opens doors in Pakistani mountaineering that were closed to his father for decades. But every interview includes the question. Every profile mentions the father. Every summit is measured against Ali's ghost. Sajid Sadpara is not just climbing mountains. He is climbing out from under the shadow of a man who became larger in death than he ever was in life. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed, this is one of the last times I'll mention it. But I mean it. Subscribe. Because we cover these stories with a depth you won't find anywhere else. The research alone for this video took weeks. If you want more of this, the subscription button is right there. Let me tell you what has changed since Ali Sadpara's death, and what hasn't. In Pakistan, Ali's death prompted a brief national conversation about mountaineering safety, expedition funding, and the treatment of Pakistani climbers on their own mountains. Government officials made promises. Committees were formed. Recommendations were drafted. Some changes materialized. The Alpine Club of Pakistan strengthened certain permit requirements. Weather forecasting services were improved at some base camps. There was talk of equipment standards, inspection protocols, and mandatory safety briefings. But systemic change requires sustained political will and funding. Pakistan has neither in abundance for mountaineering. The committees met, produced reports, and gradually dissolved. The permits are still issued without equipment inspection. The oxygen systems are still whatever climbers can afford. The mountains are still open to anyone with a permit fee and enough ambition to ignore what the mountains have already taught. In the international climbing community, the 2021 winter season on K2 prompted important discussions about risk, pressure, and the gap between well-funded and budget expeditions. Some commercial operators began offering equipment audits for clients. Some expedition leaders implemented weather forecast review protocols that require consensus before summit pushes. But these are voluntary. They're adopted by operators who choose to prioritize safety. They're ignored by operators who don't. And there is no enforcement mechanism beyond the mountain itself, which enforces its rules with absolute and irreversible finality. The bodies of Ali Sadpara, Juan Pablo Moore, and John Snorri Sigurjonsson have never been found. This is almost certainly permanent. At the altitudes where they disappeared, remains are quickly buried by snow and ice. The mountain's glacial movement may eventually transport what remains of them downward, but that process takes decades or centuries. For all practical purposes, K2 is their grave. Some bodies on K2 are visible. Climbers pass them on the standard route. They serve as warnings, frozen into the mountain, permanent residents of the death zone. Ali, Juan Pablo, and John are not among them. They are somewhere inside the mountain, invisible, unreachable, known only to the ice. In Sadpara village, life continues. Ali's children are growing up. The mountains still dominate the horizon. The village still lacks reliable electricity. The porters still carry loads for foreign climbers. The economy is still built on the mountains that give the village its livelihood and take its sons. Ali Sadpara's legacy in Pakistan is secure. He is remembered as the greatest mountaineer the country has ever produced. Schools and roads bear his name. His image appears in climbing literature and national media. He is celebrated as a hero, a pioneer, a symbol of what Pakistani climbers can achieve. But symbols don't come home. Symbols don't tuck their children into bed. Symbols don't grow old, don't laugh at dinner tables, don't hold their grandchildren. Symbols are frozen on mountains, their cameras dead, their oxygen spent, their last moments known only to the wind. The real legacy of Ali Sadpara isn't the summits or the awards. It's Sajid, a young man climbing mountains with his father's name on his back, his father's training in his muscles, and his father's last words echoing in his ears. Go down. The instruction that saved his life and ended his childhood in the same breath. Sajid will continue climbing. He has already said so. He will attempt more 8,000-meter peaks. He will push into conditions that would make most people turn back. He will carry the Sadpara name to altitudes where the human body begins to fail. And every time he clips into a rope above 8,000 meters, every time he checks his oxygen regulator in the bitter cold, every time he looks up at a summit and decides whether to continue or descend, he will hear his father's voice. Go down, Sajid. Go down. Ali Sadpara didn't say, come with me. He didn't say, wait for me. He said, go down. In the last decision he ever made, Ali Sadpara chose his son's life over his own summit. He sent Sajid down knowing he might never see him again. And then he climbed into the dark. That is not recklessness. That is not arrogance. That is something more complicated. Something that doesn't fit neatly into any narrative about ignored warnings, or influencer arrogance, or ego-driven tragedy. That is a father on the mountain that defined his life, making the only calculation that mattered, that his son would survive. He was right about that. Sajid survived. He was wrong about everything else. The mountain doesn't negotiate. It doesn't respect your record, your courage, your nation's pride, or your son's love. It exists. You enter it. And if you stay too long, it keeps you. That's the contract. Ali Sadpara signed it with every step above 8,000 meters. K2 honored the contract. If you watched this far, you understand something that most people don't. That Ali Sadpara's death wasn't a simple story of ambition versus nature. It was the story of a system, financial, cultural, political, emotional, that narrows a man's choices until only one remains. And that one choice, on the most dangerous mountain on Earth in the most dangerous season, has only one outcome. Subscribe to this channel. We tell these stories the way they deserve to be told. Not summarized. Not simplified. The full truth, with every detail, every question, every uncomfortable answer. If you've made it to the end of this video, leave a comment. Tell me what you think killed Ali Sadpara. The mountain? The equipment? The pressure? The decision at 800 meters? Or something else entirely? Next, we're covering the 2008 K2 disaster, the deadliest day in the mountain's history. 11 climbers dead in 18 hours. The investigation revealed things that the climbing industry still refuses to acknowledge. That video will be on this channel soon. Ali Sadpara's body is somewhere on K2. His camera, if it survived, holds footage no one has seen. His last moments are known only to the mountain. His son climbs in his shadow. His country mourns in his name. And K2 stands where it has always stood. Indifferent, enormous, unconquered by winter until 10 Nepali climbers proved it could be done, and then immediately proving that it could also kill. Pasang Dorje, the type of Sherpa who warns and is ignored, didn't guide this expedition. But 1,000 Pasangs exist on every mountain and every season, saying the same thing to different climbers who hear the same odds and make the same choice. Ali Sadpara heard the odds. He heard the mountain. He heard his son. He chose the summit. The summit chose silence.